Good morning. I want to talk to you about your next essay, and what I'm going to try to do with this is talk to you about it, do a little mini lecture. And what I've done is I've gone out there and written the stuff that I would normally write on the board for you. I went ahead and I wrote it on a whiteboard and took some pics of it. And I'm going to put those in, and hoping that maybe this can better explain the documents and the materials I already have out there for you on Canvas. This is the comparison contrast essay. And one thing's a little different about this essay. You're going to get to choose your topic. But before we get to the actual essay section, you're going to read two short stories. They are out there on Canvas for you. The first one is A Good Man is Hard to Find. You will have a reading quiz on that. It is a timed objective quiz, multiple choice, true or false, about the story itself. It's not about an analysis of the story. It's about the story itself, so that I can determine if you've actually read the story. Your comparison contrast essay will be on some aspect of these two stories. The second story is Revelation, and those quizzes are already out there for you. But I want to talk to you about the basis of comparison contrast. First of all, comparison simply means that you are showing how two things are similar. The other contrast is to show how two things are very different. And this is a very prescribed process. If you will follow my directions and put what I ask you to put in where I ask you to put it in, you're going to find that this is a simpler work page, simpler process. There are three purposes, and I have this out there. I'm going to post the pictures. There are three purposes for doing comparison contrast. It's not just a personal taste kind of thing, preference. It's actually comparing and contrasting for a particular reason. And the purpose is essential to this process, because one of these purposes will become the basis for your thesis statement. One is to show that one thing is superior to another. We usually don't use this for people, not in real life. The only time you would is maybe for a job application. Like if you're on a hiring committee, you might say that one person is better qualified than another, has more experience, has more training, has more education, whatever. The second purpose is to show that although two things seem similar, they are in fact quite different. And of course, then you would talk about the differences in those things. The third is that although two things seem different, they are in fact quite similar. And so your focus would be on the similarities. And you can see how that would be the basis of your thesis statement eventually. What you compare will become your subjects. And we usually refer to these as subject A and subject B. Those are the things that you are comparing and contrasting. Ford to Chevy, two kinds of shampoos, two people, two characters, whatever. How you compare them are the points. And you'll need at least 3 points. But these are, what are you looking at? If you were comparing a Chevy Silverado truck to a Ford F-150, you're not going to just use, I prefer Ford or I prefer Chevy. You're going to look at specific things like towing capacity, price, options, safety features, gas mileage, very specific things. So the Chevy Silverado and the Ford F-150 would be your subjects. And your points would be those things I just named: price, options, towing capacity, gas mileage, safety features. Those would be your points. That's how you're going to compare and contrast. Once you have determined subjects and once you've determined points, there are two different organizational patterns that we can use for comparison contrast. In other words, two forms of outlines. The outlines are the same as far as content. You're using the same subjects, you're using the same points. So it really doesn't matter. I'm going to just ask you to choose one of those. It really doesn't matter which you use, but you have to be consistent. You have to stay with it. The first is a point by point. And I have examples out there for you, both in documents and in some pictures that I took for you. Basically, what you're going to do is take each point and you're going to address subject A and then subject B. Point 2, subject A, subject B. Point 3, subject A, subject B. That is a point by point. The subject by subject outline has the same information, but you're going to take subject A and you're going to go point 1, 2, 3. Subject B, point 1, 2, 3. Okay? So that is the basic setup, and you'll be able to see that from the documents that I'm going to post out there. You'll see how that all works. I want to talk to you just briefly about the stories themselves. I have out there for you plot graphs. And this is a way of taking a story through an analysis process to think about the parts of a story other than just plot. And you can see out there the little triangle. And what that is called a plot graph. And I've listed those for you, and I want to define them here in the lecture, and then you can look at them later. And if you have questions, you can certainly contact me with those questions. But first, we talk about setting. Setting is time and place, and it can be stated fully, or it can be something that you have to use some context clues to figure out. A lot of stories, you just have to figure out, what people are saying, how they're saying it, maybe some kind of current events that are noted in the story, what they wear, are there vehicles, are there trains, are there all kinds of things. And you can figure out time and place, especially if you know some basic history, kind of a timeline of history. And sometimes it's just stated, it was 1963 in New York City in the summer, and you're just told that. The next is point of view. It's who's telling the story, the author's choice of narrator. The author and narrator in fiction are different, except in nonfiction, autobiography, and memoirs, they would be the same. But in fiction, the author, the writer, and the narrator are two different things. The narrator is a construction, a creation of the author. And you can have a first-person narrator, which is inside the story, telling the story. These narrators aren't always reliable because we're only getting information through that narrator's point of view. It's like if you were telling what happened to you last weekend. You're actually a character in the story, and you're also telling the story. So you're going to tell the story through your point of view. Third-person narrator is outside the story looking in. And there are three different types. There's a third-person limited, which means that third-person narrator outside the story looking in can reveal the thoughts and feelings and emotions of one character. A third-person omniscient character narrator tells us the story from multiple points of view. I can get inside the head of all the characters in the story and tell the story. And then a third-person objective doesn't tell anybody's thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and that's a very rare kind in fiction. Then you have characterization. This is how the writer lets you know, the reader know, what kind of person a character is. And you can be very direct. Usually not so good writers do this. They provide just basic explanation. They say she's rich, she's well educated, she's well spoken, she's well dressed, she's whatever. And they just tell you this stuff. But good writers do it indirectly. They let you figure out for yourself, just as you would in real life. If you meet somebody new, you have to figure out what kind of person this person is. And you do that by what they say, how they act, what other people say about them, how they respond in all different ways, how they speak, a multitude of things. And good writers use indirect characterization, and they create round characters that are fully developed. They're not stereotypes. They're not flat. They are round, fully developed characters that change throughout, just as humans do, just as we do. We change. Hopefully you're not the same as you were when you were in, say, 7th grade. So that means you're a dynamic character. Static characters don't change. Flat characters are basically stereotypes. They just, they fit the mold. You see this all the time in romantic comedies. You see this all the time in soap operas and dramas, those kinds of things. You have these stock characters that appear, but we want indirect characterization for good writing. Then you have the theme. The theme is the underlying message of the story. It usually can be revealed in one sentence. If you feel like you're writing more than one sentence, you're probably writing about plot. It's what the writer wants you to take with you and remember when you have forgotten the tiny details of the story. Then we move up, rising action. You can see it on the graphic that I have for the plot graph. Rising action up to conflicts. And conflicts are the struggle. And if you don't have a conflict, you don't really have a story. The conflicts, there are 5 universal conflicts that we see throughout. You can certainly have more than one conflict in a story. Often you'll have a central conflict and then little conflicts around that. And these are person versus person, which is an external conflict. Person versus himself, which is usually about guilt or shame or conscience, or it's an internal conflict. You have person versus society, which is often addressed in young adult literature. And, you have the one person, the rebel, that doesn't ever seem to fit in with society, and society's against that person. Then you have person versus nature, or sometimes the supernatural. And these are all the survival stories, the Katrinas, the hurricane stories, the blizzard stories, the tornado stories, all these things. And so lastly, you have what at one time was called man versus machine, but today is called person versus technology. And this is a lot of times in kind of futuristic, kinds of stories, kind of the apocalyptic stories. You have maybe artificial intelligence. You have a person versus some kind of technology in some way, and the technology many times in sci-fi has kind of assumed some kind of evil properties or whatever. Then you move on up to the top of the little pyramid that I have for you, and you see climax. And the climax is where change becomes inevitable. And a lot of times teachers teach this as the point of that's most exciting in the story. But I don't teach it that way, because what's exciting to you might not be exciting to me. But the climax is still the climax. This is where change becomes inevitable. It's kind of like when you're on the roller coaster and you go here, it's fine as you go here. But once you get to the top of the peak, you know that change is inevitable. It's coming. You're about to go down very fast. And so that moment where change becomes inevitable is the climax. And as you go down on the other side with falling action, you have resolution. And you will notice it's directly across from conflict, which should help you to understand the resolution is the tying up of the loose ends. It's where these conflicts are resolved. Somebody may die, somebody may win, somebody may get married, whatever. I don't know. but it's the resolving of the conflict. Then you move on down. Of course, the last part is the conclusion. The problem with resolution and conclusion, in some stories, they happen very quickly together. It's almost impossible to separate the two. In other stories, you have very clearly a resolution of the conflict, and then the conclusion is separate. So look for those things. I also have some additional literary terms that I want you to be looking at in these stories. One is symbolism. And symbolism is using something that has concrete meaning, also in an abstract way. And we do this all the time. For example, colors are often symbolic, universally sometimes. Black is the color of death, evil, or sophistication. So there are three things. When you see, there is the actual black, but it also has some symbolic meaning. Red often means passionate love. It also can be associated with violence. Blue can be masculinity for babies, little boys. Blue skies can be happiness, good times ahead. Blue can also be associated with depression or melancholy. So these things are real colors that you can actually see. So in order for something to be a symbol, it has to be real. It has to be concrete. It has to be something you can see and touch, taste, and feel, smell. Those five senses. It has to have that first. Then you attach the additional significance to it, the abstract meaning to it. You also have imagery, and a lot of times students confuse imagery and symbolism. And you may have symbols in an image, but the image is a scene, painted with words. It may be a paragraph. A symbol is just going to be one thing. An image may be a paragraph of, for example, if I painted this image right now, I would be sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop and my phone open and with a little whiteboard, and I would describe the curtains in the windows and the paint color on the wall, and I would describe how I'm sitting hunched forward looking into a camera, very uncomfortably I might say, and I have textbooks stacked here. I have notes for the lectures. I have whiteboard markers and I have pens, and that whole thing is an image. But this little whiteboard itself might be a symbol. This textbook might be a symbol within the image. The next you have irony. And irony is an awareness of a contrast between things that seem to be, the way things seem to be and the way they really are. If you don't have the awareness that there is a contrast, you don't really have irony. And you can have verbal irony, which is kind of like sarcasm. You say one thing, but you actually mean something incredibly different, opposite. Dramatic irony is when, like in a movie, when you know that the serial killer is upstairs in the shower and the detective is downstairs telling the young woman, you know, we've caught the serial killer, he's in jail, you don't have to worry anymore. And you know that she does need to worry and she doesn't need to go upstairs and she doesn't need to feel safe. That's dramatic irony, when you know something that the characters in the story do not know. And another is, and it's present in both these stories, the revelation and A Good Man is Hard to Find. Excuse me, situational irony or irony of situation is the twist at the end that you do not expect. You're rolling along and you're thinking this is going to happen, and what you realize is that it doesn't. And sometimes the opposite happens, and that's irony. The next things that I want to point out to you are just a few of like figurative language, things I want you to be aware of in the story. You have metaphors and similes. These metaphor is a comparison of unlike things. Love is a red, red rose. Love and a rose. Unlike things, I'm comparing them. Simile is a comparison of unlike things using like or as. Love is like a red, red rose. The only difference is you're using the words like or as in the comparison. Then you have hyperbole, which is a deliberate exaggeration for emphasis. I have a million papers to grade. No, I have a lot of papers to grade, but I do not have a million. But I said a million simply to emphasize the fact that I have a lot of papers to grade. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. And then personification is giving human qualities to something that's not human, giving animation or human qualities to something that is inanimate. The chair groaned as she sat, which is kind of mean, but groaned as she sat. You could use the little creek gurgled as it traveled down the forest. Those are examples of personification. Those are some things that I want you to be looking at as you read the stories. And then another thing that I've put out there on the whiteboard for you is you're going to be asked to write about these stories, to compare and contrast some element in these stories. And I'm going to ask you in each of your body paragraphs to use support or evidence from the story. In other words, quotations from the story to kind of bolster or support what you've said. For example, if you tell me so-and-so did so-and-so and believes so-and-so, I'm going to say, why? Why do you think that? And then you should be able to point out to me a specific thing in the story that indicates that. I want you to use that. And I have shown you 2 different ways of using direct quotations in your paper. One is an introduced quotation, which has very limited original. It may be something like so-and-so asks, or so-and-so states, or believes, or thinks. And then you use the whole statement. The integrated quotation, however, is use your sentence, and you only take a part of that direct quotation. A phrase, a word, a little dependent clause. You use that part and you integrate it into your own sentences. And they are punctuated and cited just a little differently. And so I have examples out there for you to see. And if you have questions about any of this, feel free to contact me early and often so that I can help you. This is also covered on pages 424 through 431 in your textbook. The language, some of the terminology is just a little different, but I hope that I've been able to point out some stuff to you. I want to encourage you to please look at your due dates. Look at when these things are due. I'm going to give you feedback at every step. I'm going to do my best to answer your questions. I know this has been a difficult transition for many of you, but I'm going to do my best to make it as easy as possible. Okay? Thank you.